Hello and welcome. I am Candy, the storybook lady, and we are here for another night of reading The Horse and His Boy, the third book in the story of this series of the Chronicles of Narnia. I'm not going to go too long into the rehash. I think by now you guys know where we are and what's going on, but just for quickly, we'll start with that we have Shasta, a boy who's run away from home, and his companion Aravis. And they've gone through lots of journeys together. And last week we saw Shasta really kind of recap those journeys through the eyes of the lion that came to visit him. And we finally learned that that lion was Aslan. And it was a little surprising because Aslan had both caused Shasta seemingly pain, but also protected him. And it just seems like the whole way, Aslan was actually protecting him and leading him towards good things, even though it seemed like it might have been bad in the moment or scary in the moment. So all that, all throughout all their adventures, they finally are here. Not they, actually, it's just Shasta. And it looks like he's about to enter into war with the king or the prince, Rabadash, right? Who has come from a faraway land to try to steal Queen Susan of Narnia, okay? And so we're here, and the war is about to break out, and so we're going to get started and just kind of see what happens this time. Even Corn looked quite serious now. "Why doesn't King Edmund get on?" he said. "I can't stand this waiting about. Chilly, too." Shasta nodded, hoping he didn't look as frightened as he felt. "The trumpet at last!" On the move now trotting, the banner streaming out in the wind. They had topped a low ridge now, and below them the whole scene suddenly opened out. A little many-towered castle with its gate toward them. No moat, unfortunately, but of course the gate shut and the portcullis down. On the walls they could see, like white dots, the faces of the defenders. Down below, about 50 of the Calormens dismounted and were steadily swinging a great tree trunk against the gate. But at once the scene changed. The main bulk of Rabadash's men had been on foot ready to assault the gate, but now he had seen the Narnians sweeping down the ridge. There is no doubt those Calormens are wonderfully trained. It seemed to Shasta only a second before a whole line of the enemy were on the horseback again, wheeling round to meet them, swinging toward them. And now a gallop. The ground between the two armies grew less every moment. Faster, faster. All swords out now, all shields up to the nose, all prayer said, all teeth clenched. Shasta was dreadfully frightened. But it suddenly came into his head. If you funk this, you'll funk every battle all your life. Now or never. And when at last the two lines met, he had really very little idea of what had happened. There was a frightful confusion and an appalling noise. His sword was knocked clean out of his hand pretty soon, and he got his reins tangled somehow, and he found himself slipping. Then a spear came straight at him, and as he ducked to avoid it, he rolled right off his horse, bashed his left knuckles terribly against someone else's armor, and then... But it's no use trying to describe the battle from Shasta's point of view. He understood too little of the fight in general, and even of his own part in it. The best way I can tell you what really happened is to take you some miles away to where the hermit of the Southern March sat gazing into the smooth pool beneath the spreading tree, with Bree and Hwin and Aravis beside him. For it was in this pool that the hermit looked when he wanted to know what was going on in the world outside the green walls of his hermitage. There, as in a mirror, he could see, at certain times, what was going on in the streets of cities far farther south than Tashbaan, or what ships were putting in Red Haven in the remote Seven Isles, or what robbers or wild beasts stirred in the great western forest between Lantern Waste and Telmar. And all this day he had hardly left his pool, even to eat or drink, for he knew that great events were on foot in Archenland. Aravis and the horses gazed into it too. They could see it was a magic pool. Instead of reflecting the tree and the sky, it revealed cloudy and colored shapes, moving, always moving, in its depths. But they could see nothing clearly. The hermit could, and from time to time he told them what he saw. A little while before Shasta rode into his first battle, the hermit had begun speaking like this. I see 1, 2, 3 eagles wheeling into the gap of the Stormness Head. One is the eldest of all eagles. He would not be out unless battle was at hand. I see him wheel to and fro, peering down sometimes at Anvard and sometimes to the east, sometimes behind Stormness. Ah, I see now what Rabadash and his men have been so busy all day. They have felled and lopped a great tree, and they are now coming out of the woods, carrying it as a ram. They have learned something from the failure of last night's assault. He would have been wiser if he had set his men to making ladders. But it takes too long, and he is impatient. Fool that he is. He ought to have ridden back to Tashbaan as soon as the first attack failed, for his whole plan depended on speed and surprise. Now they are bringing their ram into position. King Loon's men are shooting hard from the walls. 5 Calormens have fallen, but not many will. They have their shields above their heads. Rabadash is giving his orders now. With him are his most trusted lords, fierce Tarkins from the eastern provinces. I can see their faces. There is Coridan of Castle Tormont, and Azru, and Chalamash, and Ilgamuth of the Twisted Lip, and a tall Tarkin with a crimson beard. By the main, my old master Anradin, said Bree. Shh, said Aravis. Now the ram has started. If I could hear as well as see, what a noise that would make. Stroke after stroke, and no gate can stand it with forever. But wait! Something up by Stormness has scared the birds. They're coming out in masses. And wait again. I can't see yet. Ah, now I can. The whole ridge up on the east is black with horsemen. If only the wind would catch that standard and spread it out. They're over the ridge now, whoever they are. Aha! I've seen the banner now. Narnia! Narnia! It's the Red Lion! They're in full career down the hill now. I can see King Edmund. There's a woman behind the archers. Oh, what is it? Said Hwin breathlessly. All his cats are dashing out from the left of the line. Cats? Said Arvis. Great cats. Leopards and such, said the hermit impatiently. I see. The cats are coming round in a circle to get at the horses of the dismounted men. A good stroke. The Calormen horses are mad with terror already. Now the cats are in among them. But Rabadash has reformed his line and has 100 men in the saddle. They're riding to meet the Narnians. There's only 100 yards between the two lines now. Only 50. I can see King Edmund. I can see the Lord Peridian. There are 2 mere children in the Narnian line. What can the king be about to let them into battle? Only 10 yards. The lions have met. The giants on the Narnian right are doing wonders. But one's down. Shot through the eye, I suppose. The center's all a muddle. I can see more on the left. There are the 2 boys again. Lion alive! One is Prince Corin. The other, like him, has 2 peas. It's your Shasta. It's your little Shasta. Corin is fighting like a man. He's killed a Calormen. I can see a bit of the center now. Rabadash and Edmund almost met then, but the press has parted them. What about Shasta? Asked Arvis. Oh, the fool, groaned the hermit. Poor, brave little fool. He knows nothing about this work. He's making no use at all of his shield. His whole side's exposed. He hasn't the faintest idea what to do with a sword. Oh, He's remembered it now. He's waving it wildly about. Nearly cut his own pony's head off. And he will in a moment if he's not careful. But it's been knocked out of his hand now. It's mere murder sending a child into battle. He can't live 5 minutes. Duck, you fool! Oh, he's down. Killed? Asked the three voices breathlessly. How can I tell? Said the hermit. The cats have done their work. All the riderless horses are dead or escaped now. No retreat from the Calormens on them. Now the cats are turning back into the main battle. They're leaping on the ramsmen. The ram is down. Oh, good, good. The gates are opening from the inside. There's going to be a sortie. The first three are out. It's King Lune in the middle. The brothers Dar and Darin are on each side of him. Behind them are the Tran and Shar and the Cole with his brother Colin. There's 10, 20, nearly 30 of them out by now. The Calormen line is being forced back upon them. King Edmund is dealing marvelous strokes. He's just slashed Coradian's head off. Lots of Calormens have thrown down their arms and are running for the woods. Those that remain are hard-pressed. The giants are closing in on the right, cats on the left, King Lune from their rear. The Calormens are a little knot now, fighting back to back. Your Tarkin's down, Bree. Lune and Azru are fighting hand to hand. The king looks like he's winning. The king is keeping it up well. The king has won. Azru's down. King Edmund's down. Nope, he's up again. He's at it with Rabadash. They're fighting in the very gate of the castle. Several Calormens have surrendered. Darin has killed Ilgamuth. I can't see what's happened to Rabadash. I think he's dead, leaning against the castle wall, but I don't know. Chalamash and King Edmund are still fighting, but the battle is over everywhere else. Chalamash has surrendered. The battle is over. The Calormens are utterly defeated. When Shasta fell off his horse, he gave himself up for lost. But horses, even in battle, tread on human beings very much less than you would suppose. After a very horrible 10 minutes or so, Shasta realized suddenly that there was no longer any horses stamping about in the immediate neighborhood, and that the noise, for there were still a good many noises going on, was no longer that of battle. He sat up and stared about him. Even he, little as he knew of battles, could soon see that the Archenlands and Nonnens had won. The only living Calormens he could see were prisoners. The castle gates were wide open, and King Lune and King Edmund were shaking hands across the battle ram. From the circle of lords and warriors around them, there arose a sound of breathless and excited, but obviously cheerful, conversation. And then, suddenly, it all united and swelled into a great roar of laughter. Shasta picked himself up, feeling uncommonly stiff, and ran toward the sound to see what the joke was. A very curious sight met his eyes. The unfortunate Rabadash appeared to be suspended from the castle walls. His feet, which were about 2 feet above the ground, were kicking wildly. His chain shirt was somehow hitched up so that it was horribly tight around the arms and came halfway over his face. In fact, he looked just as a man looks if you catch him in the very act of getting into a stiff shirt that is a little too small for him. As far as could be made out afterward, and you may be sure the story was well talked of for many of a day, what had happened was something like this. Early in the battle, one of the giants had made an unsuccessful stamp at Rabadash with his spiked boot. Unsuccessful because it didn't crush Rabadash, which was what the giant had intended, but not quite useless because one of the spikes tore at the chainmail just as you or I might tear an ordinary shirt. So Rabadash, by the time he encountered Edmund at the gate, had a hole in the back of his hauberk, and when Edmund pressed him back nearer and nearer to the wall, he jumped up on a mounting block and stood there, raining down blows on Edmund from above. But then, finding that his position, by raising him above the heads of everyone else, made him a mark for every arrow from the Narnian boughs, and he decided to jump down again. And he meant to look and sound, no doubt for a moment he did look and sound, very grand and very dreadful as he jumped crying, "The bolt of Tash falls from above!" But he had to jump sideways because the crowd in front of him left him no landing place in that direction. And then, in the neatest way you could wish, the tear on the back of his hauberk caught on the hook in the wall. Ages ago, this hook had been a ring, had a ring in it for tying horses to. And there he found himself, like a piece of washing hung up to dry, with everyone laughing at him. "Let me down, Edmund," howled Rabadash. "Let me down and fight me like a king and a man, or if you are too great a coward to do that, kill me at once." "Certainly," began King Edmund, but King Lune interrupted. "By your majesty's good leave," said King Lune to Edmund. "Not so." Then turning to Rabadash, he said, "Your Royal Highness, if you had given that challenge a week ago, I'll answer for it there was no one in King Edmund's dominion, from the High King down to the smallest talking mouse, who would have refused it. But by attacking our castle of Anvard in a time of peace, without defiance sent, you have proved yourself no knight, but a traitor, and one rather to be whipped by the hangman than to be suffered to cross swords with any person of honor. Take him down, bind him, and carry him within till our pleasure is further known." Strong hands wrenched Rabadash's sword from him, and he was carried away into the castle, shouting, threatening, cursing, and even crying. For though he could have faced torture, he couldn't bear being made ridiculous. And Tashbin, everyone had always taken him seriously. At that moment, Corin ran up to Shasta, seized his hand, and started dragging him toward King Lune. "Here he is, father, here he is," cried Corin. "Aye, and here thou art at last," said the king in a very gruff voice, "and hast been in battle, clean contrary to your obedience. A boy to break a father's heart. At your age, a rod to your breech were fitter than a sword in your fist. Ha!" But everyone, including Corin, could see the king was very proud of him. "Chide him no more, sire, if it please you," said the Lord Darren. "His Highness would not be your son if he did not inherit your conditions. It would grieve your majesty more if he had to be reproved for the opposite fault." "Well, well," grumbled the king. "We'll pass it over for this time. And now," what came next surprised Shasta as much as anything that had ever happened to him in his life. He found himself suddenly embraced in a bear-like hug by King Lune and kissed on both his cheeks. Then the king set him down and said, "Stand here together, boys, and let all the court see you. Hold up your heads. Now, gentlemen, look on them both. Has any man any doubts?" And still Shasta could not understand why everyone stared at him and at Corin, nor what all the cheering was about. We must now return to Aravis and the horses. The hermit, watching his pool, was able to tell them that Shasta was not killed or even seriously wounded, for he saw him get up and saw how affectionately he was greeted by King Lune. But as he could only see, not hear, he did not know what anyone was saying. Once the fighting had stopped and the talking had begun, it was not worth while looking into the pool any longer. Next morning, while the hermit was indoors, the three of them discussed what they should do next. "I've had enough of this," said Hwin. "The hermit has been very good to us, and I'm very much obliged to him, I'm sure. But I'm getting as fat as a pet pony, eating all day and getting no exercise. Let's go on to Narnia." "Oh, not today, Mom," said Bree. "I wouldn't hurry things. Some other day, don't you think?" "We must see Shasta first and say goodbye to him, and apologize," said Arvis. "Exactly," said Bree with enthusiasm. "Just what I was going to say." Oh, of course, said Hwin. I expect he's in Anvard. Naturally, we look in on him and say goodbye. But that's on our way, and why shouldn't we start at once? After all, I thought it was Narnia we all wanted to get to. I suppose, said Arvis. She was beginning to wonder what exactly she would do when she got there, and she was feeling a little lonely. Of course, said Bree hastily, but there's no need to rush things, if you know what I mean. No, I don't know what you mean, said Hwin. Why don't you want to go? Brew, muttered Bree. Well, don't you see, ma'am? It's an important occasion. Returning to one's own country, entering society, the best society. It is so essential to make a good impression. Not perhaps looking quite ourselves yet, eh? Hwin broke into a hoarse laugh. It's your tail, Bree. I see it all now. You want to wait until your tail's grown again. And we don't even know if tails are worn long in Narnia. Really, Bree, you're as vain as Tarkheena and Tashbaan. You are silly, Bree, said Arvis. By the lion's mane, Tarkheena, I am nothing of the sort, said Bree indignantly. I have a proper respect for myself and for my fellow horses. That's all. Bree, said Arvis, who was not very interested in the cut of his tail, I've been wanting to ask you something for a long time. Why do you keep swearing by the lion and by the lion's mane? I thought you hated lions. So I do, answered Bree. But when I speak of the lion, of course I mean Aslan, the great deliverer of Narnia who drove away the witch in the winter. All Narnians swear by him. But is he a lion? No, of course not, said Bree in a rather shocked voice. All the stories about him in Tashbaan say he is, replied Arvis. And if he isn't a lion, why do you call him a lion? Well, you'd hardly understand that at your age, said Bree. And when I was only a little foal, when I left so, I don't quite fully understand it myself. Bree was standing with his back to the green wall while he said this, and the other two were facing him. He was talking in rather a superior tone with his eyes half shut. That is why he didn't see the changed expression in the faces of Hwin and Aravis. They had good reason to open their mouths and staring eyes, because while Bree spoke, they saw an enormous lion leap up from the outside and balance itself on the top of the green wall. Only it was brighter yellow, and it was bigger and more beautiful and more alarming than any lion they had ever seen. And at once it jumped down inside the wall and began approaching Bree from behind. It made no noise at all, and Hwin and Aravis couldn't make any noise themselves, no more than if they were frozen. No doubt, continued Bree, when they speak of him as a lion, they only mean he's as strong as a lion, or, to our enemies, of course, as fierce as a lion, or something of that kind. Even a little girl like you, Aravis, must see that it would be quite absurd to suppose he is a real lion. Indeed, it would be disrespectful. If he was a lion, he'd have to be a beast just like the rest of us. Why, and here Bree began to laugh. If he was a lion, he'd have 4 paws and a tail and whiskers. Help! For just as he said the word whiskers, one of Aslan's had actually tickled his ear. Bree shot away like an arrow to the other side of the enclosure, and there he turned. The wall was too high for him to jump, and he could fly no farther. Aravis and Hwin both started back. There was about a second of intense silence. Then Hwin, though shaking all over, gave a strange little neigh and trotted across to the lion. Please, she said, you're so beautiful. You may eat me if you like. I'd sooner be eaten by you than fed by anyone else. Dearest daughter, said Aslan, planting a lion's kiss on her twitching velvet nose. I knew you would not be long in coming to me. Joy shall be yours. and he lifted his head and spoke in a louder voice. "Now, Bree," he said, "you poor, proud, frightened horse, draw near. Nearer still, my son. Do not dare not to dare. Touch me. Smell me. Here are my paws. Here's my tails. Here's my tail. These are my whiskers. I am a true beast." "Aslan," said Bree in a shaken voice, "I'm afraid I must be rather a fool." "Happy the horse who knows that while he is still young, or the human either. Draw near, Aravis, my daughter. See, my paws are velveted. You will not be torn this time." "This time, sir?" said Aravis. "It was I who wounded you," said Aslan. "I am the only lion you met in all your journeys. Do you know why I tore you?" "No, sir." "The scratches on your back, tear for tear, throb for throb, blood for blood, were equal to the stripes laid on the back of your stepmother's slave because of the drugged sleep you cast upon her. You needed to know what it felt like." "Yes, sir. Please." "Ask on, my dear," said Aslan. "Will any more harm come to her by what I did?" "Child," said the lion, "I am telling you your story, not hers. No one is told any story but their own." Then he shook his head and spoke in a lighter voice. "Be merry, little ones," he said. "We shall meet soon again, but before that you will have another visitor." Then in one bound he reached the top of the wall and vanished from their sight. Strange to say, they felt no inclination to talk to one another about him after he had gone. They all moved slowly away to different parts of the quiet grass, and there paced to and fro, each alone, thinking. About half an hour later, the two horses were summoned to the back of the house to eat something nice that the hermit had got ready for them, and Aravis, still walking and thinking, was startled by the harsh sound of a trumpet outside the gate. "Who's there?" said Aravis. "His Royal Highness Prince Cor of Archenland," said a voice from outside. Aravis undid the door and opened it, drawing back a little way to let strangers in. Two soldiers with halberds came first and took their stand at either side of the entry. Then followed a herald and the trumpeter. "His Royal Highness Prince Cor of Archenland desires an audience with the Lady Aravis," said the herald. Then he and the trumpeter drew aside and bowed, and the soldiers saluted, and the prince himself came in. All his attendants withdrew and closed the gate behind them. The prince bowed, and a very clumsy bow for a prince it was. Aravis curtsied in the Calormene style, which is not at all like ours, and did it very well because, of course, she had been taught how. Then she looked up and saw what a sort of person this prince was. She saw a mere boy. He was bare-headed, and his fair hair was encircled with a very thin band of gold, hardly thicker than a wire. His upper tunic was of white cambric, as fine as a handkerchief, so that the bright red tunic beneath it showed through. His left hand, which rested on his enameled sword hilt, was bandaged. Aravis looked twice at his face before she gasped and said, "Oh, why, it's Shasta!" Shasta all at once turned very red and began speaking very quickly. "Look here, Aravis," he said, I do hope you won't think I'm got up like this, and the trumpeters and all, to try to impress you or make out that I'm different or any rot of that sort, because I'd far rather have come down in my old clothes. But they're burnt now, and my father said—" "Your father?" said Aravis. "Apparently, King Lune is my father," said Shasta. "I might really have guessed it, Corn been so like me. We were twins, you see. Oh, my name isn't Shasta, it's Cor." "Cor is a nicer name than Shasta," said Aravis. Brothers' names run like that in Archenland, said Shasta. Or Prince Kor, as we must now call him. Like Dar and Darin, Cole and Colin, and so on. Kor, said Arvis. No, shut up. There's something I've got to say at once. I'm sorry I've been such a pig, but I did change before I knew you were a prince. Honestly, I did. When you went back and faced the lion. It wasn't really going to kill you at all, that lion, said Kor. I know, said Aravis, nodding. Both were still and solemn for a moment as each saw that the other knew about Aslan. Suddenly, Aravis remembered Kor's bandaged hand. I say, she cried, I forgot you've been in battle. Is that a wound? A mere scratch, said Kor, using for the first time a rather loudly tone. But a moment later he burst out laughing and said, If you want to know the truth, it isn't a proper wound at all. I only took the skin off my knuckles just as any clumsy fool might do without going near a battle. Still, you were in battle, said Aravis. It must have been wonderful. It wasn't at all like what I thought, said Kor. But Kor, you haven't told me anything yet about King Lune and how he found out who you were. Well, let's sit down, said Kor, for it's rather a long story. And by the way, Father's an absolute brick. I'd be just as pleased, or very nearly at finding he's my father, even if he wasn't a king. Even though education and all sorts of horrible things are going to happen to me. But you want the story. Well, Kor and I were twins. And about a week after we both were born, apparently, they took us to a wise old centaur in Narnia to be blessed or something. Now this centaur was a prophet, as a good many centaurs are. Perhaps you haven't seen any centaurs yet? There were some in the battle yesterday. Most remarkable people, but I can't say I feel quite at home with them yet. I say, Aravis, there are going to be a lot of things to get used to in these northern countries. Yes, there are, said Nervous, but get on with the story. Well, as soon as he saw Corn and me, it seems the centaur looked at me and said, A day will come when that boy will save Archenland from the deadliest danger in which ever she lay. So, of course, my mother and father are very pleased. But there was someone present who wasn't. This was a chap called Lord Barr, who had been father's Lord Chancellor, and apparently he'd done something wrong. Bezzling or some word like that. I didn't understand that part very well, and father had to dismiss him. But nothing else was done to him, and he was allowed to go on living in Archenland. But he must have been as bad as he could be, for it came out afterward he had been in the pay of Tisroc, and had sent a lot of secret information to Tashban. So as soon as he heard I was going to save Archenland from a great danger, he decided I must be put out of the way. Well, he succeeded in kidnapping me, I don't exactly know how, and rowed away down the winding arrow to the coast. He had everything prepared, and there was a ship manned with his own followers lying ready for him, and he put out to sea with me on board. Father got wind of it, though not quite in time, and he was after him as quickly as he could. The Lord Barr was already at sea when Father reached the coast, but not out of sight, and Father was embarked in one of his own warships within 20 minutes. It must have been a wonderful chase. They were 6 days following Barr's galleon, and brought her to battle on the 7th. It was a great sea fight. I heard a lot about it yesterday evening. From 10 o'clock in the morning till sunset, our people took the ship in the end. But I wasn't there. The Lord Barr himself had been killed in the battle, but one of his men said that early that morning, as soon as he saw he was certain to be overhauled, Barr had given me to one of the knights and sent us both away in the ship's boat. And that boat was never seen again. But of course, that was the same boat that Aslan, as he seems to be in the back of all these stories, pushed ashore at the right place for Arshish to pick me up. I wish I knew that knight's name, for he must have kept me alive and starved himself to do it. I suppose Aslan would say that was part of someone else's story, said Arvis. I was forgetting that, said Kor. And I wonder how the prophecy will work out, said Arvis, And what great danger is that you're to save Archenland from? Well, said Cor rather awkwardly, they seem to think I've done it already. Oh! Arvis clapped her hands. Why, of course, she said. How stupid I am, and how wonderful. Archenland can never be in much great danger than it was when Rapidash had crossed the Arrow with his 200 horse and you hadn't yet got through your message. Don't you feel proud? I think I feel a bit scared, said Cor. And you'll be living in Onvard now, said Arvis rather wistfully. Oh, said Cor, I'd nearly forgotten what I came about. Father wants you to come and live with us. He says there's been no lady in the court, they call it the court, I don't know why, since Mother died. Do, Arvis, you'll like Father, and Corin. They're not like me, they've been properly brought up. You needn't be afraid of that. Oh, stop it, said Arvis, or we'll have a real fight. Of course I'll come. Now let's go and see the horses, said Cor. There was a great and joyous meeting between Bree and Cor and Bree, who was still in a rather subdued frame of mind, agreed to set out for Arnvard at once. He and Hwin would cross into Narnia on the following day. All four bade an affectionate farewell to the hermit and promised that they would visit him again. By about the middle of the morning they were on their way. The horses had expected that Arvis and Cor would ride, but Cor explained that except in war, where everyone must do what he can do best, no one in Archenland or Narnia ever dreamed of mounting a talking horse. This reminded poor Bree again of how little he knew about Narnian customs and what dreadful mistakes he might make. So while Hwin strolled along in a happy dream, Bree got more nervous and more self-conscious with every step he took. Puck up, Bree, said Cor. It's far worse for me than for you. You aren't going to be educated. I shall be learning, reading, and writing, and heraldry, and dancing, and history, and music, while you'll be galloping and rolling on the hills of Narnia to your heart's content. But that's just the point, groaned Bree. Do talking horses roll? Supposing they don't. I can't bear to give it up. What do you think, Hwin? I'm going to roll anyway, said Hwin. I don't suppose any of them will care 2 lumps of sugar whether you roll or not. Are we near the castle? Said Bree to Cor. Round the next bend, said the prince. Well, I'm going to have a good one now. It may be the last. Wait for me a minute. And we'll stop there. I suspect we don't have much more to go, but we'll probably finish up next week, so I look forward to seeing you then.